How does this portfolio site owner keep monthly traffic numbers in the tens of millions despite all of the Google updates?
Themed websites. So now it's a total of 6 websites. We're covering anything and everything that should appeal to the Disney fan or those who are curious about Disney, Star Wars, Marvel, and we cover other theme parks and the like. Now we have, for the entire portfolio of sites, it's about 35 million a month.
Well, Kurt is back on the podcast to share some high-level wisdom with us.
What are the tried and true things that are really going to work that our audience has responded to, and what are the things that seem to be more conversational, more important at the moment as a programmatic ad-driven site? How long someone stays on an article and how many ads they see, has as a key contributor to income. That for us is the number one thing when it comes to AI, is how we're bringing in humans to verify the content that may or may not be written with AI. And they seem to reward stories that are more localized.
Including how to satisfy all types of readers by tackling the same topics from different angles.
But ideally, even amongst the sites that I have, each site is covering things a little bit in a new, fresh way than the other site. We may be interested in the same topic with 5 different takes. So that's really how, we have to be thinking about content.
Welcome to an exclusive Niche Pursuits interview with Kurt Schmidt, owner of Inside the Magic, and back on the podcast by popular demand. Enjoy. Before we jump into the podcast, I wanted to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Search Intelligence. Here's a short clip of Ferry from Search Intelligence showing you how their agency built digital PR links to a client's website.
This campaign got us big links in websites such as Lifehacker, Wales Online, Daily Record, and about 20 other news websites. Let me show you how we've done it. We knew that people will be flying a lot this summer, and we knew that journalists will be writing about this topic a lot. So, on behalf of our client, we put together a nice guide about how to fall asleep on the plane. Then we use Muckrack to find journalists who write about travel. Then we put our advice in a nice email and send the tips to the journalists. Within just a few days, the links started landing, securing our client natural placements in really big websites, just like this, and this. This is a great example about how you can leverage seasonal trends to earn links to a website. Anticipate what journalists want to write about at all times and give them the stories that they need. They will reward you with some great, juicy links. I hope this is helpful.
If you want similar link building PR campaigns for your website, head to search-intelligence.co.uk and get in touch with them now. All right, welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman, and today we have a returning guest, Kurt Schmidt with InsideTheMagic.net. Kurt, welcome back.
Thank you. I appreciate being invited back. This is exciting.
You're at your first episode, and for people who haven't listened to it, you gotta, I hate to tell people to hit pause, but you really need to go back and listen to it. It was really well received, really one of the more popular ones we've had, and so much of what you talked about almost a year ago has almost become more discussed in our industry since then. So it only made sense to have you back on. But just in case somebody wants to keep listening and they want to learn more about you, maybe tell us a little bit more about your background, catch us up a little bit on who you are and how you came about InsideTheMagic.net.
Yeah. So I purchased Inside the Magic coming up here close on 6 years ago. And new to the online business space and world. Prior to this, I was a credit union CEO and worked in lending in the credit union industry. So had a background in the financial services side of things, but not in online publishing. But nevertheless, 6 years ago is when I took the leap into this world. And then it was about 2.5 years ago that I added to the portfolio of websites with acquisition of 5 other Disney-themed websites. So now it's a total of 6 websites. We're covering anything and everything that should appeal to the Disney fan or those who are curious about Disney, Star Wars, Marvel, and we cover other theme parks and the like.
Yeah, in our previous interview, we talked a lot about various things like how you get traffic and the different buckets you have. We talked about how you came about into this site, and certainly that the first year that you had the site is quite the story there. So again, definitely go spend some time listening to that. But we'll dive into a couple other details today. Especially, I want to hear about these acquisitions you've made because we didn't get to hear much about that. I think that'll interest a lot of people. If you can, when we last talked, Inside the Magic was getting kind of like about 40 million page views per month throughout 2022. How has 2023 gone? Like, where is the website at now? And are you still getting roughly the same buckets of traffic from the
Yeah.
sources you were getting before?
Unfortunately, traffic's not as good now as it was then. I think actually about the time we were recording last year, it was shortly after had made some staffing changes, and that actually did create a little bit of a hit. A few other things created a hit to traffic overall, and it seems like it's been up and down and moved around a little bit. But Inside the Magic itself is probably down about 35-40% this year compared to last year. 25 to 30 million page views a month is more common. But the good news is the other sites that I have, where last year they were doing maybe a few million total. Now we have for the entire portfolio of sites, it's about 35 million a month. So in that regard, we're down a little bit compared to last year, but not drastic numbers. And when the largest site has gone down some, some of the others have gone up. And since all of them are in the same niche, part of that, it might be that we've taken traffic from ourselves. I think part of it is just, as the nature of the business that we have with traffic, it can be very news driven. It can be very subject to, Google Discover algorithms, so on and so forth. As far as the total traffic, a lot of the same story. Google Discover is still number one. The sites that have grown the most that I have, they have seen that growth also in Google Discover. Facebook is number two. This has been a tough year in terms of Facebook traffic. So that's been down, across the board. Then once we get three and four, it's kind of flip a coin one month to the next in terms of whether it's Google search or Google News. Search traffic has been it took a dip and then climbed back up, and then Google News has stayed very constant throughout the year, as good now as it was anytime last year. Pretty much near all-time highs. And then this has been specific just to a couple sites, but Newsbreak traffic has really been big for us, and so we've seen a lot of changes there. That's probably the area I would say is the number one change since we spoke, a year ago.
If I did my math right on the last episode, you were generating like almost 15 million page views a month from Discover alone. So even if that's up or down a little bit, we're going to drill into Discover
Mhm.
traffic a little bit later on. And I'm taking a few notes here on some things I want to ask you about Newsbreak. That's really fascinating. Let me ask you a quick question though about the traffic fluctuations, if we could, just from afar. Like, trying to think how much of the downward turn that has happened on Inside the Magic, how much do you think is a result of maybe algorithmic type stuff, whether it's a Google algorithm update, whether it's not being as successful in Discover, whether it's Facebook's algorithm changing? How much of it is algorithmic versus maybe more seasonal? Like I'm thinking 2022, I think early 2022, that was when I took my family back to Disneyland for the first time since the whole COVID stuff. And I'm sure a lot of people were going earlier, but maybe 2022 is a really good year and 2023 isn't necessarily down, or it's just normalized a bit. How do you evaluate stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I think about a lot. And frankly, it's challenging to really know for sure. So 2022, like you said, there was a lot of travel. We don't see a ton of our traffic based on the travel ups and downs and everything, but can't help but think that it had some impact. One of the other big changes for us is, for those of you who will recall, in May of 2022, there was the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trials. Our best article of all time was written May of 2022, and it was about Johnny Depp. So, you add travel, you add, a news story, such as that. Now, that one article got 5.5 million page views. So it's not like, when you're talking about nearly 500 million page views over the course of a year, that by itself, was a major sway. But nevertheless, that was a massive topic. And to get, over 5 million page views in a single article on an event that we don't really have a similar event to recreate this year, without a doubt, played into it. But then as far as the algorithm, one of the things that, I've even been debating and trying to figure out about the site is it does seem like, if I can use a football analogy, we may be, instead of sustaining long drives or whatever with our traffic, we might get a first down and then, we have to punt the ball or whatever, like the traffic goes away. And it just doesn't seem like the drives of hit Google Discover articles are as sustainable. Is that something we're doing internally? Perhaps that's something that I've been thinking a lot about. If you, going back to my Johnny Depp, hit article example, if you follow that up with another Johnny Depp article, and you kind of get this, you know, train of hit articles on a similar subject, my goofy football analogy, that drive sustains a little bit longer. Yesterday we had a great day, and a lot of the good articles from yesterday aren't doing as good, today. And again, it just kind of today feels like part of that. You get a pop, but then it dies out. You get another pop and it dies out. So, that very well, could be algorithm issues and everything. And then surprisingly enough, in October, Google even had mentioned that one of their updates had caused some funkiness in Google
Right.
Discover. And, looking at our own numbers, I estimate that might have been a 15% hit in the month of October on Google Discover when I look at the prior month versus, that month in isolation. So, yeah, a lot of different things. And it's hard to say for sure, but I think it's all of the above that has been a factor.
So many moving parts. So many moving parts. um, hey, so let's kind of dive into some Google Discover chatter. You've had another year under your belt with Google Discover since the last interview. In the last interview, you shared a lot of great tips. And again, if people are interested in kind of maybe, I don't want to call it a 101, but certainly like, hey, Google Discover from a high level, go back and listen to that episode. You talked about things like, hey, make sure your image sizes are nice and big so that, Google loves pulling those big images. You guys talked a lot about headlines and how to write catchy headlines that engaged. Were a little bit clickbaity, but not clickbaity to the point where when people arrive, they feel like they're not getting what they came for, and that balance. Um, Talk about anything that maybe has changed or updated to your model for Google Discover this year that maybe in years past wasn't as prevalent in what you did, or you weren't seen as much of a factor that is now.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I would do is I would, point the audience back to so much of what Spencer has shared with what has worked with Google Discover. I know as he's, has been sharing information and everything, I've been keeping an eye on it, and I would echo so many of those points. So again, a shout out, to what he has seen, but in terms of things that I feel like I've seen and everything here this next year, again, and I apologize for some of the analogies or whatever, but
Oh, they're
there's
great.
a certain part of Google Discover made me start thinking about it. And I don't have a background in this, so if anyone knows this industry well, maybe I'm mischaracterizing it. But it kind of feels like the fashion industry where you're guessing next season's fashion trends, like so much
Mm.
of trying to stay on top of the trends and the conversation and everything. There is that anticipating what people will, want to talk about. And in part of that anticipation, I also think of, and this goes to, I'm going to call it an update to, what I was sharing on headlines and everything previously, is, really thinking about and trying to avoid the ruts of, we handled a headline this way in the past, it worked. And so you get maybe used to handling headlines in a similar way, but kind of tying this to the, anticipating the audience's, interest and everything. It's like, gosh, I've seen this kind of thing. It doesn't sound as intriguing. It's not as interesting and everything. Like we all want to have new, interesting information, presented to us that keeps us engaged. And at the end of the day, what really matters, I still believe, my mind has not changed on this one iota. What really matters is having engaging content. And so if you are falling into a rut and you kind of lose your ability to engage as much, I think that can, be a big factor in everything. But then it's also partially looking at like, okay, what is the current trend? What is the thing that seems to be working? I already brought up the whole Johnny Depp, trial thing. And, almost as soon as those words escape my mouth, I'm like, yeah, I also feel like I'm sharing some, um, sadness for what used to be there. But part of that's just the game, and part of the process is like, what is today's conversation that is intriguing and interesting in the same way for our audience? The Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial was interesting a year ago and everything. So, it's those kind of things that I think about the most. But at its core, it's, I'm really trying to think about, as a team, we are trying to think about what what's going to be engaging, what's going to keep people, coming back. And I guess tactically, one of the things we've done different, we've really leaned in even more this past year to looking not so much at page views and the amount of people coming to the site in terms of page views, but really how long are they staying engaged on the site.
Mm.
So we have some internal metrics that we're looking at using Chartbeat as a tool instead of Google Analytics. That's really, seeing how far people are reading into articles, how are they responding, and that is more of our North Star than a page view in terms of, any kind of sign of success.
I think a lot of people listening might typically approach content on their website from, we'll call it more of an evergreen approach,
Mm-hmm.
where they're looking at maybe topics, they're doing keyword research on those topics, and that keyword research is producing articles that, just by the nature of keyword research tools, ranks over the course of a couple of years. What like, could you give people a bit of a framework for how to think through ideation around topics that'll do better on Google Discover? Like how to think through stuff that hits in Google Discover, because I've got to imagine it's very different than the type of stuff that's going to rank 2 to 3 years from now.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things is, where's the discussion going in your niche? So if I were to, and part of this is, I guess even what I've observed, you all have done with niche pursuits. You're looking at where the conversation's going, and for instance, we're going to dig into more talking about Google Discover. And so if you start, talking more about Google Discover because that is a topic more and more people are interested in, then almost, that's going to be your kind of pathway into Google Discover. So for us, when we're looking at it, and this is probably a bad example as we're recording this. Disney's latest movie, Wish, just came out, and so that movie, at least as of this recording, has not been much of a success.
I saw that on
Um,
your website today.
but yes, yeah, we're still covering it, and but it's, still, it's new enough. We're going to be covering this. We're going to be talking about it. What I would really hope for is that movie was a resounding success, and a lot of people were, really engaged in talking about that movie. But it's looking at those kind of things that are trending, and at the same time, does your industry have, some absolutes? Um, Again, as I think about this from a niche pursuits, standpoint, keyword research, even if it's not the hot topic of the moment, it is a topic that is, you're always going to kind of come back to. And so if there is something new you can share, you don't want to lose sight of that. So the point I'm trying to make is I try to think of this, we try to think of this almost on two different tracks. what are the tried and true things that are really going to work that our audience has responded to, and what are the things that seem to be more conversational, more important at the moment. And those, in a news driven, Google Discover driven kind of mindset, those things can change on a dime because the news changes on a dime. But you still have to recognize what are your bread and butter topics, what are the things that people will come back to time and time again. And because of that, I personally spend some time on Google Search Console every month, looking at what are the topics that we have covered that are ranking. How does this change from times in the past? And you'll see our coverage to some extent ebb and flow based on the things that are ranking more recently, because we're getting success covering this celebrity, this attraction, this park, whatever that may be.
I want to ask you about how you structure a team to create content that works on Google Discover. There's a freshness factor that has to go into it, like a recency sort of.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to call it bias, but like stuff happens, you got to publish it if you want to hit
Yep.
Discover. Last interview, year or so ago, you were around 30 people. How do you have a team? How do you structure a team to create discoverable, Google discoverable content?
So for one, we just publish a lot of content.
Yeah.
This and this is across all my sites. At our peak, for about 2 months this year, we were frankly producing too much content, and we've since pulled back. But we were producing about 90 articles a day, 7 days a week, and we kept up that pace for about 2 months straight. Now we've pulled back. We're at about the 50, 60 articles a day, 7 days a week. And, but to your point, that's really how we address the freshness and everything. Is we're producing a lot of content, and so things stay fresh. And in our numbers and what we see, you have to kind of dig hard to find what are those long-term evergreen articles that are still producing couple hundred, 1,000 page views a day or a week, or whatever that consistent production may look like. Because it's really for us, there's a new conversation, a new story, a new something going on that we're covering. That's what is helping inform our content decisions. And then what we're also doing is looking at how other publications have covered the same or similar content, and trying to do it in a new, fresh way. Ideally, and we don't do this maybe as well as I would hope, but ideally, even amongst the sites that I have, each site is covering things a little bit in a new, fresh way than the other site. Because then we could theoretically, on one single topic, have 2 or 3 articles that are very similar topically, but all hitting at once, if we've covered it in a way that it really feels like these are 3 different takes on the same general topic. But again, one of the traps that sometimes we can fall into is we see whatever the news story is, and we cover it the same way. Others have covered it. We've even covered it, amongst our other publications, and then that's not as successful. Google Discover, I guess in its very name, it's helping us as readers discover content that we may be interested in, and most of us are not interested in reading the same thing 5 different ways.
Right.
We may be interested in the same topic with 5 different takes. So that's really how we have to be thinking about content.
Suffice to say, like if you're waking up in the morning and you're looking through your phone and someone is already in your Discover feed for a topic, is that like a pretty clear indicator that you're probably not going to get there? Or will Google kind of cycle through different publications on the same topic?
Correct. I would say it's a pretty clear indicator we will not get there unless we are able to cover the topic in a noticeable enough different way. And so, like one example of this is there is a topic that for those who follow the theme parks close enough may be aware of a few months back. Um, there was some restrictions put on independent tour guides in Disney World. So there's a kind of this niche industry of tour guides who will, offer to, help you maximize your time, your day around the park and everything. And they kind of been operating in this gray area and everything. Business Insider, some national publication had initially covered that. It was in Google Discover. Had three of my sites cover the same story. One site actually covered that story and did amazingly well in Google Discover. The key difference was that author took that story and didn't focus so much on Disney saying you can't have, we're outlawing these, or trying to put restrictions on these independent tours, but more of the, what this did to the actual business owners who are operating the tours. So it became more of this. This is now a digging into the small business owner,
Yeah.
and that was enough different take on largely the same concept that did really well. But had we focused, and the other two sites that did focus this on the tours themselves, that did not do that well because, to your point, there was already a story winning in Google Discover by the time we created any content around that same conversation.
I feel like I can see the Google Discover headline right now, like "Meet Kurt. Disney destroyed his tour guide business overnight."
Yeah, I mean, it was that maybe we should take one of our headlines and retitle it to that. So yes, I mean, but something to that
Yeah.
to that effect.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. That's really, I like that. That's a great analogy because I think that helps people who are thinking about like, oh, in my niche, in rock climbing, I'm just looking at my window. Um, you know, somebody just set a new world record, but Rock Climbing Magazine already covered it. Well, maybe you could take different approaches to the same story and still get ranking for it in Google Discover.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you've mentioned it a couple times now, so it's probably a good time to transition into what is going on with all these sites you acquired. You have expanded your footprint quite a bit in the Disney space. Maybe talk us through like the origin of that decision and desire, and then how that all played itself out.
Yeah, so it happened a little bit by chance, I would say, in so much as the person I acquired these sites from, it was one owner, one yeah portfolio of site owner, and he actually had a backup offer on Inside the Magic had that and my purchase fallen through. And so, because of that, we got talking early on in my ownership of Inside the Magic, and I knew he was looking at acquiring more sites. I thought, one of these days maybe I should do the same thing, but it wasn't fully on my mind. And then how many ever years later, but I guess it was 2.5 years ago that I made the purchase. So 3 years after I probably first met him, we got talking, and he said, I'm actually now thinking about getting out of the online publication space. I'm going to look at some other business opportunities. Would you be interested? Didn't take long thinking about it. I'm like, gosh, these are, tremendous sites. I know of them. I like what they're doing. And I think there's some things, I was seeing they weren't on Google Discover having the same success. They had a different ad network that I thought, by making a change to the ad network I had would be more helpful. So, some good opportunities. I'm like, yeah, let's let me do some due diligence. Didn't take too long and figured out, yep, I wanted to purchase them, and then just really try to incorporate these sites into the business model, the way of generating traffic and monetizing the business and everything that we already had. Plus, in the process, I learned a few things that they were doing well. Before I purchased them, they were doing better with email traffic, newsletter traffic. They were doing better with some affiliate traffic. So help me get an education on some of these areas that we were not as strong on, and we were able to up our game. So it made a lot of sense.
Hey, just a quick break. I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Just a quick reminder that today's episode is sponsored by Search Intelligence. Now, I've got a short clip from Ferry with Search Intelligence showing you how their agency built digital PR links to a client's website.
We got 20 links and placements on massive websites such as The Express, Mirror, Daily Record, and many more with a campaign about the pros and cons of popular diets. How about? This is exactly how we've done it. Our client is a very popular fitness client. We have asked them to provide thorough expert commentary about the pros and cons of the most popular diets. Once we have this information, we put this in a nice email and send it out to 15,000, yes, 15,000 journalists from around the world that write about fitness. So good. And unhealthy. Big publications picked up our story from the email, giving our client massive, juicy, saucy, healthy links that are 100% relevant to their website and that will keep the rankings of the website in a great shape. You see what I've done there? I hope this case study inspires and that you will start leveraging expert commentary type campaigns to land links to your or your client's website, just like we've done it with this campaign.
Like what you just heard and are looking for similar link building PR campaigns for your website? Just go to search-intelligence.co.uk and get in touch with them today. The big question when you're acquiring, other sites or other brands, but still inside your vertical, your niche, right, is like, how do you handle what each specializes in and focuses on? And, talk through how you evaluated whether this was going to just have diminishing returns because, you're already publishing content on the topic versus how it can actually scale your returns and help you get more bang for your buck.
So I would say some of that there was it was kind of an educated guess that this would work, and my educated guess was based on looking at things like I'd seen some studies in the past about other media companies and how many media companies that people will consume, and most of us don't get all of our news from one single source. We have a handful of sources, and I thought, so okay, can we be amongst the handful of sources with maybe 2 websites, 3 websites, something like that. I also was thinking of this and kind of looking at a Procter and Gamble analogy with laundry detergent that, and I don't know even Procter and Gamble that much, but I know like they make Tide and they make a few other laundry detergents.
Everything.
They all clean your clothes. But some people like, the bottle, the red bottle with the bullseye or whatever, and someone else likes the green bottle or whatever. And so you buy different laundry detergent. I'm like, well, kind of news has a certain degree of that where you have your preferences for whatever reasons that you have your preferences. So with that in mind, what I knew I wanted to preserve and keep is I was willing that we would have the same general topic covered by multiple sites, but I wanted to assign writers more specifically to sites so that if writer A on one site is taking the story and has a certain approach or a way of covering a topic, and writer B is taking that on another site, that readers can start developing, just as they already have or continue to develop, their preferences on, I like how this site covers a topic versus that site. And since the process that I had in place for writers already had a lot of hands off and gave a lot of authority and autonomy to writers, it just seemed to kind of work that we could continue to give the writers the freedom to cover topics, in different ways. And, sure enough, you'll have on one site, maybe a writer says that, their take on a certain thing is some way that is in total opposite or contradiction to what we said on another site, in things that are a matter of opinion. Where there's not an exact right or wrong answer. And so It seemed to work. At the same time, it might have been that part of what we've seen with Inside the Magic's traffic declining this year has to do with these other sites. The second largest site that I have in the portfolio this year will roughly 3x its traffic from the year prior. So when you get that kind of growth, you probably got the readers from somewhere. How many of those came from Inside the Magic? I'm sure some percentage did. I try through SEMrush and some other tools to try to parse that out, but it's really hard. I know I'm
Yeah.
cannibalizing on some degree, and I think I'm gaining traffic and readers, in other ways. But yeah, it's still a little bit of, even 2.5 years later, it's a little bit of an experiment and process and everything, and we're still tweaking how we look at the coverage between all the different sites.
I can imagine it's a bit of a nightmare to some degree, just because I mean I run a marketing agency for a living, and attribution is one of the most
Mm.
hotly contested things that we
Yep.
try to help people do, and it's always a bit imprecise.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Being generous with that. Um, I want to make sure we get to this topic, and so I'm going to ask now. It's a bit of a right turn. What role is AI playing in your business right now, as it is? I mean, you kind of touched on some things last year in
Mhm.
the interview, and that interview came out, I think, right around when ChatGPT was hitting the market, and so here we are a year later, and AI is taking a much more prevalent role for a lot of large and small content producers. You guys produce so much content. I'd just be dying to hear the ways you're using AI or the ways you're seeing it be effective in the business.
Yeah. So, and I think I mentioned this last year. I should have double checked, but one of the things we use from a SEO tool set is Market Muse.
Yes.
Market Muse has incorporated AI more and more into their tool set. So, in all the ways Market Muse is incorporating AI, expanding a topic, and in some cases, actually writing portions of the topic and everything, we will use that. Well, let me say, some writers, not all writers, will use that in their content creation. Again, being a very hands-off management approach. I have some writers that I fully believe they are not using AI at all. They don't want to use it, and I understand why they don't want to use it. There is this challenge as a writer. Well, I'm using AI, and it's kind of taking away from my job. Do I really want to embrace this technology? And then there's other writers who will look at the same opportunity and say, yeah, this is great. I'm going to spend less time writing and I'm going to spend more time, how am I positioning a topic? What is the hook, to bring the reader in and everything. But nevertheless, a lot of that is getting done within the Market Muse tool set. I know we also have some writers who are going directly to ChatGPT. Have really at this point, it's on my end been more experimentation. Can we formalize that into a stronger structure? How do we want to handle that? We haven't made much progress. I would say the number one thing, though, that we are doing with AI, and we're still in the process of taking some people that we've trained and are doing this on a part-time basis and getting them eventually moved into a full-time role, but that hasn't happened yet, is having fact checkers. I really have become convinced that the area where publications perhaps are going to use AI that's going to come back and bite them is not really being cautious of the content that is going out. And with a publication our size and or publications and all the content we're creating, really want to have that additional set of eyes. And fact checking, kind of having this, operating in the field, so to speak, is harder than it may seem on the surface. In so much as, especially if there's opinion in there, is, going back to something like clickbait. Well, is that an okay use of a tease in how you've positioned a topic? Have you actually been deceptive? Is that something that as a fact checker we should pull out. What is that interaction? Does the fact checker actually get to say, this is not, um, you know, something that we're going to put out, to our readership, or does the writer, who we've given a lot of authority, get to make that final call? So we're leaning heavily into fact checking, but we're also so in the midst of fact checking, that it's almost, even for me, I have more questions than answers, I think, right now on the whole fact checking process. But I would say that for us is the number one thing when it comes to AI, is how we're bringing in humans to verify the content that may or may not be written with AI. And really, when it comes to fact checking, it doesn't matter if that was AI written content or human written content. If we deem that it's not accurate, we need to, make some revisions and everything. So that's really where our mindset has been with AI, is around this whole fact checking process and everything, probably more than any other single way.
You touched on it in the last interview a little bit, but I wanted to bring it back up again as it relates to a lot of what we talked about, whether it's market muse and optimizing articles,
Mhm.
whether it's fact checking articles. Um, uh, we talked about the need to publish content rapidly in
Mhm.
order to kind of be at the forefront of getting in Google Discover. How do you implement all this stuff when you've got to get the article out there, maybe in a matter of hours, at least that day, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, and that's one of those things that we are still, struggling and kind of working through. Because to that very point, is there you don't want to sacrifice, speed and covering a topic quickly, if that is, part of what your business model depends on. And our business model definitely does depend on, speed. Um, to it's you don't want, yeah, the pursuit of perfect, can get in the way of producing something that's going to be very good and work well. And maybe you'll never get to perfect because you've slowed down the process so much. And that's all I can report really on that, is that probably in the last 2 3 months we have tried out, 3 4 different variations of how we are trying to build that into our process, because it feels like if we go a little bit too far, we slow things down too much. We don't go far enough, and we're like, we really should have caught that. And so part of that, I think, like with anything, is when you're building out a new, portion of a team, is you really kind of have to experiment, what works for your, team and your people. And part of how I'm even currently thinking about this is there's a difference on how maybe we approach, things, even during the day when we have, the fact checkers working, versus, are we going to be pursuing news as heavily, in the late afternoon, evening hours, over the weekend and everything, when we don't have that process? Is it actually, acceptable for us to continue to, push out the news in that way? And this is something, again, it's early stages of formulating, in,
Mm.
our minds internally on, how we're going to handle this. But it's very much, the kind of questions that we're trying to address. So yeah, the change with AI this past year, on top of all the Google algorithm changes, on top of everything else, I mean, this has been a massive year of trying to figure out all the changes going on. Yeah, it's been unreal.
I try to explain to my wife some days, like, no, I'll forever remember 2023. I don't care how old I am, and I don't care how tumultuous the following years are in my career. I will forever remember 2023 as the year that the ground never stopped shaking.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, I had this listed on my agenda. I wanted to ask about it. I can't find a good time, so I'm just going to ask it right now so we
Okay.
don't miss it. It does have to do with the Google Discover topic, and I want to ask, because you mentioned it a little bit earlier. What what are you seeing as, if any, differences in publishing and creating content for Google Discover versus Google News? And does it even get that detailed for you guys? Like, Google News is more about news topics. Discover is more about topics that relate to individuals and their interests. I might be overgeneralizing that. That's how I've always described it to clients. Is there any specification in how you guys do stuff at your company around those two, or is it all just kind of one bucket?
So how we think about it internally, it's more of one bucket. One of the things that I, there's so many moving pieces. We try best we can to simplify how we're looking at things as often as we can. And it seems to be that if you keep a priority on creating engaging content, if you keep a priority on speed and timeliness, if you keep a priority on a lot of the other things that Google talks about, whether it's the EEAT requirements or image size or any of these other number of things, then yes, maybe all those things aren't needed for Discover in the same way they're needed for Google News, but you've at least created this approach. This is how we're viewing content. And if it happens to be more newsworthy and going to do well in Google News, great. You're going to be prepared for that. And maybe I've done a little bit of overkill on some other things, but I'd rather have a little bit of overkill than not doing enough. And, then the same way for Discover. So yeah, we've tried to create more of this, like, here's a general set of things that we try to do all the time when we're producing content. And so even if the topic is a little bit more evergreen, you know we don't we don't like it if a writer sits on a topic for weeks or months on end trying to come with the perfect way of covering that topic. We still operate a lot more like a news organization. Okay, we
Mm,
recognize maybe that topic can they can work on it for a day or two, but we still try to get things out quickly, and again, it just
yeah.
simplifies it for us.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Um, we haven't touched on your other forms of traffic yet. So let me ask you about. I know a year ago, Facebook was driving a good amount. Uh, you mentioned some other ones when we were talking, and so maybe this might be a good time to touch on Newsbreak as well, and maybe explain a bit more about that to listeners who maybe don't have any clue what that is, and maybe how you're optimizing for that. So
Yeah.
Facebook, Newsbreak, any other channels that you're seeing drive traffic.
Yeah, so yes, Facebook news break, I think of, something like Flipboard or Smart News, a lot of these, fit into a similar bucket for whatever reason. And I can't even fully explain or understand why. Newsbreak has been of that, that bucket of these, app slash social media kind of traffic sources, the one that seems to pop. But it's been very specific. It's popped for Inside the Magic, our largest site. It's popped. It has not for our second largest site. It has been beneficial for our third and fourth largest, but it's non-existent in the fifth largest and the sixth largest. So like it's three of the six sites see Newsbreak traffic, and it's our third largest site that sees the most Newsbreak traffic. They seem to reward stories that are more localized. So if they're picking up something, within the story that would tie it to a locality, that seems to help. Um, it's even been interesting. We've played around with some syndication of our own articles internally, and sometimes it won't pick up a story on one site that otherwise would get Newsbreak traffic, but it does pick it up on this other site. Um, we early on found with Newsbreak we were getting super low engagement time, and for the longest time we were seeing all this traffic. And because we've leaned so heavily into how long people are reading an article, I'll admit, at despite the advice of smarter people on the team, I was ignoring Newsbreak in many ways, because I just we'd see engagement times that just didn't seem to make sense, that there was really any value in it. But then we had a few other writers write more articles that were getting picked up with Newsbreak, and they started seeing great engagement time, and yeah, and it's worked out really great. The thing I can say with Newsbreak is I'm still trying to figure out why a site gets included in Newsbreak versus another. Now you can't apply to be have Newsbreak consider your traffic. And the traffic we've gotten so far has largely been what they've decided to send, without us being formally approved as a Newsbreak
Hmm.
publisher. some of
Mhm.
our conversations when we have spoken to them about applying to be included is they have said that that may be going away in time. We'll have to see. One of our internal conversations, especially when we're getting low engagement, was, do we want Newsbreak traffic? Will that cannibalize better, higher earning traffic from Google Discover? Because if someone sees the article on Newsbreak and then sees it later on Google Discover, our early thinking is we might be able to earn 10 times more on that article on Google Discover. So you really wanted to make sure we were having next to no cannibalization. But now that seems to be less and less of a concern as we're seeing higher engagement rates. I mean, Google Discover still pays better, but Newsbreak, as we get those higher engagement rates, seems to be doing better. Keeping in mind that as a programmatic ad driven site, how long someone stays on an article and how many ads they see, has is a key contributor to income.
Perfect transition. Thank you. I was going to ask you about monetization. I mean, you were sharing last time that you were with Cafe Media, Ad Thrive, Raptive, the whole
Yep.
vocabulary of different brands we can associate. Are you still with them? Are you with them with all of your sites? And then I have a couple follow up questions. Like, how's
Yeah.
it going this year?
Yeah, so we are with them with all the sites, and October was an absolute amazing month with our RPMs, and so far, as we're recording this in November, November is looking to be even better.
Good.
So I couldn't be happier from an RPM. Well, I could be happier, but in reality, I have to say I'm pretty darn happy with the RPMs. But it's very different depending on site. So for those of you who have worked, any listeners who've worked with Raptive, know that they have a direct sales team. And I think Mediavine and some of the other ad networks also have the same thing. But one of the things that I theorize when it comes to our ad rates differences between the sites is, how many of these direct ad deals are coming to one site versus another. Inside the Magic, for example, still monetizes the best on a per page view basis of all the sites. It's the largest site. It's the most well known brand. And it doesn't exactly go from largest site to smallest site and where those RPMs come in, but there is a distinct benefit for the larger sites.
Mm. The uh, monetization via ads has been a hot topic, especially as it relates to Google updates and the helpful content update. A lot of site owners who are making the majority of their revenue from ads have made changes in terms of what ad density, how many ads are shown above the fold, video ads, these kind of things. Like, where are you guys at as a brand in terms of how heavy you go on ads, and if you fluctuate that at all, if you have made any adjustments on that in the last year or so?
Yeah, so we do use Raptive's auto optimize, and so we're going to get a lot of the what Raptive would say is best practices. Now, again, I know depending on site owner, some people say, hey, that's way too many ads. I haven't been one of those who have put restrictions on what Raptive does. I actually listen keenly to the different advice they have. Is there advantage of even changing some of the margins or different things so different ad sizes can load, and you get a more complete auction for your ad inventory. Trying to think as far as like specific things we've done to really make sure we get more ads in place. There's been a few little things like pixel size is something when so going back to having purchased all these sites, for first year or two, I just kind of allowed a lot of how that site was set up to kind of stay intact. This year for the fourth quarter, really start paying attention to pixel size. And I think Raptive, I should know this totally off the top of my head because we were looking at it, but they're going to say 20 to 22 pixels is the optimal size for ads. And we had some of our content that was, I think, if it was in block quotes, could be as small as 12 pixels. So, we increase that, which will then help, deliver a few more ads. But that's really how we've thought about it, is largely taking the auto optimize approach with, adding a little bit of, how can we make, the site, I guess, more ad friendly.
Mhm.
But at the same time, what you're really doing when you're changing pixel size, you're also making it easier to read. I guess if your eyes work really well, you don't really care if it's, 12 pixels or 20 pixels. But as you get a little bit older, giving your eyes a little bit of a break,
Amen.
no one's going to argue with that.
Uh, yeah, I have that debate a lot, depending on who I'm with and how young they are. They
Hmm.
have different thoughts about how large the font should be.
Yep.
Um, I've got to imagine that uh, that perhaps you get hit up by brands a decent amount. Do you do much in the way of collaborations? Do you do much in the way of extra monetization opportunities outside of just what AdThrive programmatically puts on the site?
So we made an attempt to do that earlier this year. It didn't work that well for us, and in large part, um, it's it's a more difficult operation to
Yeah,
sell ads directly than, I think. Even as I was getting prepared to do more of this, I thought, well, yeah, we'll talk to a brand, we'll quote a price, we'll do this or that. This will all be, wonderful. Man, when you're used to an ad network like a Raptive or a Mediavine or, a Zoic or any of those ad networks out there, where they're taking everything off of your plate, that's a lot of time and attention. And then, bottom line, yes, we've definitely. I think this year will be a record breaking year for us on number of direct sale ads.
good.
Percentage wise, we're still in the low single digits. If we hit 2-3% of our revenue from direct sale ads,
Yeah,
that's going to be about it. So it's, record breaking year is relative. It's not a big part of our operation, and it's not something that, as we dove into it this year, was anyway a rousing success that we said, hey, let's double down on this. If anything, we've been pulling back and saying, let's, not get distracted, too much on, doing ad sales. It's
yeah.
kind of nice to have a Raptive, take care of that for us.
Um, as we wrap up, I've been saving this question to kind of ask you at the end here. A lot of people are talking about Google Discover and how to get more traffic from it.
Mhm.
And you touched on how when it's going, it's such a great thing, right? Like
Mhm.
when you have that article that hits, and certainly last year you had an article that hit to the tune of 5.5 million page views, and it's like a faucet of traffic that gets turned on and turned off. And a lot of it like you said, got discussed in the October situation where Discover traffic was turned on for a lot of people, it seems like inadvertently, and turned off for a lot of people inadvertently. What advice from just a very high level do you have if someone is interested in pursuing Google Discover traffic? Now, you've talked a lot about it, so I get, the type of article you write, captivating headlines, good user experience, all these kind of things. But anything else you could add for someone who isn't getting traffic from Discover, but is dying to do that in 2024 and beyond?
So the advice is be patient, but even beyond be patient, um, pay attention. So, we're coming up on the end of the year, and one of the processes that I'm going through right now is I'm looking at our top writers, their content this year versus their content last year. And, if I ask most of the writers, they would say, yeah, I'm producing fairly similar content. And in some ways, some of these, articles aren't having as much success this year as they had last year. But one of the things, as I'm, preaching patience, it's also looking at and seeing, okay, I'm going to actually go back and read the top articles from 2022 that this writer wrote, and I'm going to read the top articles from this year that they wrote. Where are they different? Do you have a way to really, kind of dig in and find distinctions? And surprisingly, I'm seeing a lot more distinctions than I would have thought. And so, in my mind, again, because I'm a fan of analogies, I kind of think about, It's almost like if you're gaining or losing weight, you may not realize in the days or weeks that that's happening so much that you're gaining or losing weight. But when you see that your pants are getting tighter or looser, or you look at a picture from a year ago or whatever, you're like, oh, yeah, I've gained some weight, I've lost some weight or whatever. Like, thinking about Google Discover and thinking about your traffic, I preach, a similar kind of, look at it, from those kind of perspectives. And yes, I know this is probably going to seem a little bit contradictory. You're looking at, what is the trending topic, the thing, that sort of thing. But, in this part of what I'm sharing is, really just pay attention to how you were doing things in the past, either when you had more or less success. And with anything, try to build upon, what you're doing, and hopefully take a path that is going to lead to more and more success. Easier said than done.
Man.
But, as we come to the end of the year, I think it just more naturally, sets itself up for, looking at those differences. And, if, you had an article that got 10 page views of Google Discover traffic in 2022, and a different article that got 1,000 pages in 2023, is there anything you can tell that might be different about those that you didn't even think of at the time when you were writing them? And you can leverage to do more of the 2023 stuff.
Yeah. Hey, Kurt, it's been so great having you back on. We got the deep dive Google Discover. We got to hear about your acquisitions. We got to hear about how you guys are using AI. Really a lot of great insight you shared. Where now that you have so many websites, where's the best place for people to follow along with you? I mean, we know about InsideTheMagic.net. Is that the best place for people to go if they're looking to see more of what you're doing?
Yeah, take a look at InsideTheMagic.net. Take a look at DisneyDining.com. That's our second largest site. You can actually, I think it's in DisneyDining.com. You'll see in the footer we have a lot of the other sites listed. Happy to have readers, on all of those. But again, kind of my philosophy is most people will have one or two sites that they follow. So, if it's any of those, any of them, would be more than grateful.
It's great. Well, thanks again for coming back on. I'm sure we have a lot of Disney fans listening, and it's been great having you. And congrats on your success. I mean, like you said, what a crazy year 2023 has been. But it's really great to hear how you're navigating it and how you're approaching it and stuff. And obviously learn a ton from you along the way. So thanks again.
Well, thank you. I so much enjoyed being on the podcast, both before and again this time. And, really hope the, listeners find this beneficial. So thank you so much.
Until we talk again. Thanks.
Sounds good. All right.
Today's episode is sponsored by Search Intelligence. Here's a short clip of Ferry from Search Intelligence showing you how their agency built digital PR links to a client's website.
What a crazy campaign. How to Sleep on Your Back. This campaign got us links in Huffington Post, Glamour magazine, Mirror, and lots of other great news publications. Let me show you how we've done it. It was so simple. Our sleep client provided us with expert commentary about how to train yourself to fall asleep on your back. They also gave advice on why it's best to sleep on your back. Once we've had this information, we went to Muckrack and searched for journalists that consistently write about sleep and well-being. We've sent these journalists the advice provided by the client, and within one day the links started flowing in. Glamour magazine, a DR81 website, picked it up. Huffington Post, DR88, Mirror UK, DR90. A massive avalanche of links blasted through our client's website with this simple yet effective campaign about how to sleep on your back. I hope this inspires, and I hope you'll use this technique to land massive links to your or your client's website.
Thanks for joining us today on the podcast. Just a final reminder that it was brought to you by Search Intelligence. And if you're looking for link building PR campaigns for your website, just head over to search-intelligence.co.uk and get in touch with them today. Cheers.